Thank you for spending your Thursday evening with us, as it were. Yeah. Before we kick off with the oral history collection stories, I do hope that you like stories because I've quite a few for you this evening. But if you allow me to start off with a personal anecdote of my own, so I just take you to the personal anecdote. When I was 12 years old, I lived in a town that had no public transport. My mum was kind enough to take me to and from school. But one evening, long after the last bell had gone, she was nowhere to be seen. So waited half an hour, no mum. Waited another half hour, still no mum. So it was getting a bit fretful. And then at this point, 4 of my schoolmates came up to me, pushing their bicycles. They had just finished sports training and they were heading home. Now, home for them was in a rubber estate, 10 kilometers away. I didn't know these girls actually. They were in primary 6D and I was in primary 6A. Yeah. So, well, but guess what happened next? They asked me, so what are you doing here? It's so late already. So I said, well, told them what my mum wasn't around yet. And they then insisted on waiting with me until my mum arrived. So that night, I really tossed and turned, hoping that they had made it home safely. Now, some years later, I ran my school's English language club. So these girls were my members. They've become firm friends by then. So for our final year lunch, I asked them, what would you like? And all of them said in one voice, burgers. See, those were the days when there was no McDonald's in the town that I lived. And so, but we had a greasy spoon that delivered. So on the big day, in came the delivery man on his scooter with 44 plastic bags of burgers hanging off him. He had burgers in a box behind him, burgers swinging from his handlebars. I kid you not, burgers pinned to his t-shirt, burgers under his helmet. Oh man, I tell you, lucky for him, our budget didn't extend to fries. That's all I can say. So there we are. But today, of course, we have mobile phones to keep anxiety at bay. That town I used to live in now has 6 McDonald's outlets. But folks, too often we still classify children as being in A or D groups. Yeah. People more than ever are delivering food, and friends always have each other's back. Yeah. So the thing is, having said all this, folks, I've always marveled at how kind people can be, how people can just smile through all their struggles, however challenging. Yeah, like this hawker here. Yeah. Char Kway Teow hawker. What keeps him on his feet 12 hours a day, day after day after day, until the pavement, the concrete pavement under his feet cracks and turns to grit? What keeps him going? What is it that keeps all of us going? Resilience, hanging in there, never giving up, being decent to everybody despite all. I've always marveled at all that. Yeah. And I can't help thinking that we do have a lot to learn from one another. And why do I say that? Folks, if we think of it, there's very little happening under the sun today that has not happened before. Yeah? And it seems to me, the talk tonight is about the past is our future, and that's essentially it. It seems to me that we have a lot to learn from the past to help us with the future. If we accept that actually there's very little under the sun that hasn't already happened. Yeah? So I just have a thought to share with you. Why perhaps the past should be our future. Because if we do not know how far we have come, how would we know how far we can go? Yeah? If we could just take a moment to ponder that. This sense that, we are able to do so much And therefore, folks, we should be able to do that very much more because we have accomplished so much. We have come this far. So I knowingly go into darkness now so that you can focus more on the stories and not so much on whatever I'm gesticulating here. Okay? Okay, now, fortunately for all of us, even as we ponder, how far we have come and how far we could go, at our fingertips is already a one-stop school of hard knocks. And it's also one of Singapore's best-kept secrets. And that best-kept secret is the Oral History Centre collection of Singapore. And this is the portal, this is the door that opens you to a whole world of possibilities and great inspiration. And I'll be sharing with you some stories from this portal of possibilities, as I like to call it, or frankly, it's one of Singapore's greatest national treasures. Yeah, I hope I'll be able to convince you of that by the end of my presentation tonight. But here we are. What do we have? This is just a very, friendly and seemingly, simple homepage. But actually, once you type in whatever you wish to read or learn, right, you have access to over 5,000 interviews. That's more than 23,000 hours of voice recordings and thousands upon thousands of pages of transcripts about Singaporeans, from Singaporeans to Singaporeans, and actually to everyone who cares to tap into this portal. So it is, to me, really one of Singapore's greatest national treasures. But why take it from me, right? Take it from them. I thought that this evening I have actually asked around, what are some of the great perennial concerns that we all have, or questions that we would like answered about life. And so I've taken the liberty of homing in on a few questions. So the following slides will have the question, and then some of the stories that from the Oral History Centre collection that illustrate these possible answers to these questions. So if I may begin with a burning cry from last week. Anybody remembers what was one of the big things that happened in the world last week, or happened in the United States last week? Trump, yes. Well, it's always Trump, isn't it, these days? But anything specific about Trump? Absolutely. Send her back. Ilan Omar, right? Not just Ilan, but also AOC, yeah. We know her as A. Thank you, Pak Meng. Yeah, so send her back. Now, how do we counter send her back or send them back? So Donald Trump seems to think that American lawmakers who are not white do not belong in America. I mean, how do you counter send them back? How do you respond to racism? Well, taking a leaf from the Oral History Centre collection, or as I shall call it from now on, the OHC collection, in the 1920s, in fact from 1922 onwards, I think some of us remember there were famines in China. So there were a lot of people from mainland China fleeing the famines, and some of them resettled in Singapore. And guess where they resettled? Any guesses? You would think so, right? But guess where? They settled in Kampong Glam, the very seat of Malay culture. So the natural question would be, how would all the Malays feel about, all these Chinese suddenly coming in, this sudden influx of migrants from mainland China? Well, according to longtime resident of Kampong Glam, Haji Muhammad Siddiq bin Siraj, in his oral history interview, he said, well, folks, he realized that life in China was very hard. And when the Chinese settled in Kampong Glam, first thing they did, open shops to sell things that their neighbors needed. Neighbors included this Javanese satay seller. This is actually a satay seller from the 20s in Kampong Glam, another gem from the National Archives of Singapore, this photograph. So the Chinese will open shops to sell sundries, things that their neighbors needed. And not only that, they acquired the Malay language. They even learned to speak a bit of Javanese. So moral of the story, well, how do you counter racism? Find ways to fit in, be of use to others. Yeah. So that's what Haji Muhammad Siddiq had to share with us in his oral history. Yeah. Welcome. Come. Yeah. Come. Lai Beng. No, come. Yeah. So yeah, we have Lai Beng to thank for many of these lovely stories. So having said that, you know, folks, despite the best efforts and intentions, right, sometimes tensions just build. So on 21st of July 1964, we had the Prophet Muhammad riots. I think some of us may remember or even have been familiar with it. I see Pak Meng nodding. So right after the riots that evening, lawyer Syed Esa Amanoa had the really unenviable task of going around to all the mosques in Singapore to tell the people there, please calm down, stop rioting. Okay? Peace is what we need to work on now. He went with 3 policemen in 5 patrol cars all over Singapore, and guess what his car meter read at the end of the day, as he told the Oral History Centre. He drove 105 miles. That, according to my husband, is about 170 kilometers, give or take a few kilometers, in one evening. And along the way, he saw quite a few Chinese people stranded in the streets after the riots. So what did he do? He picked them up. He gave them a lift home. Yeah. So in Syed Asa's case, send them back took on a different meaning lah. Yeah. It really was send them home. Yeah. Send them back. So basically, from this story, I learned from Syed Asa, don't hold grudges. Yeah. If you want to counter racism, let bygones be bygones. And Lim Ki Chan, a sports reporter with the Straits Times, said as much. Ki Chan lived in Joo Chiat Road, right opposite a Malay kampung. And he says in his oral history interview, during the riots, the Prophet Muhammad riots of 1964, there was no problem in his kampung. In fact, he and his Malay neighbors continued talking to each other, being as friendly as always. And Ki Chan insisted the only problem were the bad guys, the gangsters. He insists that it was the gangsters who started the riots, not just anybody. And so, from Ki Chan I learned, do not tar an entire community with one brush. So, this is what I learned about countering things like send them back. Yeah? You know, given that migration is such a burning issue these days. So that's the first concern, the first like burning cry, and these are stories that help to illustrate that. Yeah, and if I may go on to the second question. We've just heard about the riots, but frankly, riots were not the biggest problem for Singapore when it became independent on 9 August 1965. Here, as we all know, is founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew on TV at a press conference to announce Singapore's separation from Malaysia that very day, 9 August 1965. Singapore, to be candid, did not seem to have a fighting chance then. It did not have any natural resources, it still doesn't. It depended on others for water even, yeah? And many among its people were in 2 minds about whether to stay in Singapore or migrate to Malaysia. So what do you do in a situation like that? How do you live between a rock and a hard place? I think, Mr. Lee was distraught, and his face kind of mirrors just what living between a rock and a hard place was at that time. But from Abdul Qadir Tai Bali, he was a trader. He admitted in his interview with the Oral History Centre, he said, I really thought Singapore would suffer. For sure, business would suffer because we depended so much on Malaysia at that time for water, for everything else. But he then added, in fact, he stressed, he said, but you know what? There are millions of people still in Singapore. So if they could carry on, I can carry on. So he never left. He stayed with Singapore, and he actually built his father's business, the Bombay Trading Company, to become something really of a business of real note in Singapore in later years. So there we are. Look for the bright side and move towards it. That's what I learned from Mr. Abdul Qadir. But having said all that, we are talking about a new nation, Singapore, in 1965. How do we get everyone moving in the same direction? Well, teacher Christabel Alvis, who is distinguished by the fact that she taught at only one school all her life, I think it was Naval Base Secondary School, Christabel Alvis, she saw that whenever the then new national anthem, Majulah Singapura, was played, right, her students perked up and became more attentive. So she said, okay, this is a good sign, right? Unfortunately, when it came to singing the Majulah Singapura, perhaps due to the fact that maybe some were not so familiar with Malay, they didn't sing it with gusto. So what did Christabel do? She made them practice over and over and over again, as in, to quote her, you sing this properly, you sing this properly or you don't go home. Yeah. So sometimes when you need to get everyone moving in the same direction, you just got to get them together and doing what needs to be done to move forward, yeah? So that's what I learned from Christabel. Now, it's one thing to get everybody moving in the direction, but sometimes, as we all probably have experienced, you cannot force square pegs into round holes. And Dr. Lau Wai Ha was a National Institute of Education pioneer, and her job was to retrain teachers who were used to teaching in Chinese to teach in English instead. Can you imagine what a struggle it was for these teachers? So they did their very best, but at the end, they came up to Dr. Lau and said, Dr. Lau, cannot lie, I still haven't mastered English. And who can blame them? Frankly, if you do not have a strong foundation in any language, not just English, it's very hard, especially when you're already, in your 30s, if you have it lucky, in your 30s or 40s even. So what happened, Dr. Lau realized, is that because they couldn't teach so well in English as they could in Chinese, the students laughed at them. And worse than that, the students thought, since you don't speak you don't speak English well, you don't have much knowledge. How awful is that? So Dr. Lau's experience with retraining these teachers taught her that you just have to allow people to believe in themselves, know what is true to them, and don't force change or don't change for the sake of change. Yeah. So that's what it's like when you're between a rock and a hard place. It may be more, it may be kinder in the end to just be true to yourself. Yeah. So if I may move on to the next question then. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, here we are. Sometimes, maybe more often than not, we meet folks who are opposed to our views, or opposed to us, or just opposed to anybody, yeah? So how do you disarm an enemy? How do you, turn somebody into a friend, shall we say? And here we have a lot of lessons from the Japanese occupation, World War II in Singapore. Over here, the scene needs some explaining. It's actually Suk-Ching in progress, 1942. This is probably sometime in February or early March. And this is at Kandahar Street. And anybody knows what Suk-Ching is? I'm sure many among you do. Yeah. Purging, yeah. It's the mass rounding up of all able-bodied Chinese men and boys, because the Japanese thought they might threaten them, right? Intellectually, physically, and all that. Rounded up all these able-bodied men, herded them like cattle onto lorries, into trucks. And I'm very sorry to say that thousands of them were then massacred, shot, whatever have you, Yeah, so that was Suk-Ching. So this is Suk-Ching in progress. Um, Anybody remember Robert Yao? Yes, yeah. I'm sure some friends of his in the house, right? He actually helped launch National Service in 1967, but he's multi-talented. And later he helped shape Esplanade Theatres on the Bay. Yeah, so that's Robert Yao. But what I would like to share with you this evening is about Robert Yao's father. You know, confronted with the enemy, he was actually among this sort of, among a scene like this, he was about to be herded onto a lorry, and a Japanese guard was standing. But Robert Yao's father was very smart. He positioned himself between a gate and nearest to the gate in case there was chance for him to escape. So he actually, while waiting to be herded into the lorry, he struck up a conversation with the Japanese guard there. And it, you know, stroke of luck, call it what you will, right? The Japanese guard had actually worked in Shanghai before. And the Yaos, Robert Yao's family are Shanghainese. So guess what? Robert Yao's father started talking to the Japanese guard in Shanghainese. And suddenly, the guard's face just crumbled. It just became twisted, and I guess he was totally like beside himself. And he just told Robert Yao's father to get the heck out of there. Just escape, yeah. So sometimes find common ground with the person who opposes you. It can work wonders. It can, at least in Robert Yao's father's case. So that's one lesson I took from the Japanese occupation. Having said that, we have something a bit different from Eugene Wijayasinghe, whom some of you may recall as a principal of Raffles Institution, Temasek Junior College, a great educator, but very stingy with his marks. Yeah. Former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong complained that getting marks from Mr. Wijayasinghe is like getting gold bullion, like getting bullion. So that's Mr. Wijayasinghe for you. But guess what his family did in wartime? They actually invited Japanese soldiers and administrators back to the house for a drink, for a meal, so that, in his words, they could be comfortable with us and we could be comfortable with them. So comfortable that when one of the soldiers who had meals with the Wijayasinghes was posted to the Burma front, that soldier ran all the way from the railway station to their house to say goodbye, and then ran all the way back to the railway station. So sometimes it helps to imagine what it's like to be in, you know, the shoes of the person who opposes you, and just continue being decent to that person, because, you know, that person is a human being too. So if you are decent, you will feel the kindness, yeah? So that's what I took away from the Wijayasinghes. Now, not walking in your so-called enemy shoes can be disastrous. We all probably know Jeremy Monteiro, right? He's Singapore's most illustrious jazzman, but so illustrious that he had quite a beginning. At the age of 16, he was appointed leader of the band for Club 392. I'm afraid I do not know Club 392, but I understand it was one of the hot and hopping bands in Orchard Road, perhaps in the 70s. At 16, Jeremy led the band. Unfortunately, you know, there are some musicians, they move to the beat of their own time. So there was a bandmate who always came late, never on time. And so Jeremy said, oh, I've got to discipline him, huh? Then the thing is, this bandmate is about 30 years Jeremy's senior, in his 40s, late 40s. And Jeremy said, look, you got to come on time, okay? The band can't be waiting for you every day. So this gentleman did not appreciate that and wanted to punch Jeremy, wanted to beat him up badly. But luckily another bandmate intervened and said, hey, what's wrong with you? You want to bully a small guy? Yeah. So that's how Jeremy was saved from being beaten up. But Jeremy then said, should I walk in his shoes, in that bandmate's shoes, the one who always comes late? I should have been more tactful in my instructions. So yeah, not really finding ways to sympathize, if not empathize with someone else, can be disastrous. But that's just to share those thoughts with you. If I may move on. Many enemies you can dodge, but what if the enemy is invisible? Here you see former Prime Minister, then was Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong and Mrs. Goh and many other well-wishers. Yeah, we all know this scene, I think. We all remember. This is the sort of vigil for the victims of SARS at the Palm Valley in the Botanic Gardens in 2003, towards the end of SARS. Yeah, I was there that evening covering it for the Straits Times. So it's quite a memory. So how do you overcome fear? You know, when the enemy is invisible. We all remember, right? SARS spread so fast and it killed very quickly. Well, we may know this gentleman too, Mr. Liak Teng Lit. He's a former chief executive for Alexandra Hospital. So he gives a very moving account of SARS from the very beginning, when the doctors at Tan Tock Seng Hospital were detecting something weird about what was going on in Singapore in March 2003, but weren't quite sure, did not even know that it was SARS. Yeah, it's incredible account. You should go and type Liak Teng Lit and read his story, or listen to his recording, which is even more powerful. Listen to his voice. So how did Mr. Liak Teng Lit overcome, help every Singaporean overcome their fears? He worked with a cartoonist to depict the SARS virus, which is a coronavirus, and corona, as some of us know, means crown, right? So he depicted the SARS virus as a very silly creature wearing a crown. And then he and the cartoonist sort of like built an effigy, and then he got ministers and MPs to just whack the effigy in public. Yeah, and it actually helped to stem people's fears during that very, very difficult time in 2003, March to July 2003. So sometimes making light of the danger, very clear and present danger, but finding ways to make light of it, poke fun at it even, can embolden everybody, give them new strength. So I learned a lot from Mr. Liak's oral history. And wow, okay, you talk about punching effigies, but listen to what Sin Leong said. Do we all know Sin Leong? Yeah, he's one of the co-creators of Yu Sheng, right? The Chinese New Year very popular fish salad. Okay, now Sin Leong is the chairman of Red Star Restaurant. He actually owns it with some of the co-creators of Yu Sheng. But guess what he did during SARS? He's a restaurant owner. What he did? Can you guess what he did? He kept Red Star Restaurant open. You know what he said to his customers? Okay, I know we are going through a lot, but when you come to Red Star Restaurant, just think there is no SARS. Yeah. And his customers kept coming. And it's quite a feat given that there was a drop of at least 30% in business in Singapore during the SARS period. I think some of us might actually remember that very, very, very difficult challenge during that time. So Sin Leong, okay, and guess what? Of course, customers will say, hey, hello, your waiters better wear masks, you know, to be on the safe side and all that. Sin Leong said, no, okay, my waiters are not lepers. We are not going to wear masks, but we promise you we're going to do temperature checks every hour on the hour, and anybody who feels the slightest bit feverish, we send home, have a good rest. Yeah, but he said no masks. Because we have to fight this fear. And we have to fight it with honesty, with integrity. So that's what Sin Leong did with fear. But when it comes to fear, there really are brave hearts. And one such brave heart is Sheila Brun Allen. She's a Eurasian. I think her father was Australian, her mother was Chinese. Just down the road, we have like Funan Centre, right? The new Funan Centre has opened. Well, in February 1942, Sheila Brun Allen was walking through that area. She was part of the what they call the prisoners of war, right? They herded all the civilians, especially the Caucasian, Eurasian, the civilians, marching them off. The Japanese soldiers were marching them off to Sime Road. Sheila was among them. She was only 14 years old then. She saw a baby in distress at the side of the road with the mother. So she ran to pick up the baby. She's just one of those, very giving hearts. Ran to pick up the baby, but a Japanese sentry got there first. And you know what he did? He threw the baby up into the air and then let the baby land on his bayonet. So, the whole was impaled on the bayonet. And Sheila saw all of this right before her eyes. And she said, from that day onwards, every time she heard a baby cry, she had nightmares. Yeah. But guess what she chose as a career, folks? Just take a guess. Very close, ma'am. She became a children's nurse. And you know why she became a children's nurse? Well, in her words, she said, I did that because I have to atone for the baby I didn't pick up. Yeah, so there we are. How do you overcome fear? Sometimes you just have to face the fear. And wow, takes a lot to face the fear like Sheila Brun-Ellen, but that's what she did. Okay, if I may move on. Okay, now there's a more common kind of fear. We do not often speak truth to power, do we? We fear that, it might dent our careers, spoil our promotion chances, a lot of concerns, very real concerns, why we do not speak truth to power. Here we have Dr. Goh Keng Swee, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore. Certainly, he is the architect of the economy, defense, a lot of great foundations were laid by Dr. Goh. So now, veterinarian Ngiam Tong Tao is a Dr. Ngiam Tong Tao, worked very closely with Dr. Goh in the 60s and 70s to acquire farmland to build factories, to create Jurong Industrial Estate. So Dr. Ngiam calculated and listened to what those who were on the farmland said, and then presented his calculations to Dr. Goh. And Dr. Goh thundered. You know what he thundered? Dr. Ngiam, are you working for the Social Welfare Department? Yeah. So you know what Dr. Ngiam thought at that point? I said, habis lah. All the poor families are not going to get much money. But guess what? Because Dr. Ngiam stood by his calculations, Dr. Goh eventually relented, agreed to the fair sum of compensation that Dr. Ngiam proposed. So, moral of the story, at least from Dr. Ngiam's experiences with Dr. Goh, do what is right by others, not what you think your boss feels might be right. Just have integrity, do what is right. So I take some inspiration from that, because speaking truth to power, as we all know, is a difficult thing to do. Now we then have Mrs. Khatijun Nisa Siraj. She is the first woman to be appointed an officer in the Sharia Court of Singapore. It used to be really an all-male domain. So what did she do? She said, look, I think when it comes to counseling troubled couples, women are better. Women have that special touch. They understand and they can reason better with husband and wife. So she had to tell this to an all-male, management. Yeah. But I think gradually she managed to win them round to her way of thinking. So sometimes just remind people of the big picture. What is it that you're trying to achieve, right? You're trying to help to bring about reconciliation between husband and wife. So maybe give women a chance to try that, since they have the strength, the natural strength to do so. So that's what I learned from Mrs. Khatijun Nisa Siraj. And then, you know what, folks? It always takes a big man to admit he is wrong, but also to actually be very generous to his opponents. So we all know that name, don't we? Singapore's first Chief Minister, David Marshall. He, as we know, was founder of the Workers' Party, which meant he wasn't with the PAP. And of course, he had his differences of opinion. But guess what? Guess what David Marshall said in the 70s? Can you guess? Any thoughts? Well, I'll share with you because it's quite unlike his what his stance was in the earlier days. He said he had to say, all things considered, the PAP deserves the highest praise because with little background, with almost no aid in its infant steps, it achieved so much stability, international respect, and economic growth for Singapore. So, from David Marshall, the great David Marshall, I learned that always be balanced in your assessments, especially the assessments of your, when assessing your opponents. Yeah. So, yeah, I hope that gives you some idea of how some people have found it useful to speak truth to power. Then, if I may go on to the next question. This is a perennial one, how to succeed, right, in life. But maybe to make it, to change it up and make it a bit more fun for all of us, I'll use our national passion. What's our national passion? Food, absolutely. I'll use examples of food to try and illustrate this for all of us. So, quick quiz. Food tasted better in the old days. True or false? True. Okay. Why? Why true?
Because of poverty.
Actually, you're all right. You are all right. Natural produce and because of poverty. Anyone knows Vincent Gabriel? Vincent Gabriel was a teacher, but also sort of like businessman on the side. But the most important thing was he was a foodie and he charted the development of food in Singapore, especially street food. So he knows a thing or two about, food in Singapore. And he said, food tasted better in yesteryear. Why? Because anything unsold for the day, right? The hawkers and the family would stuff themselves with it. They would never allow leftovers to be sold to customers. For customers, it must always be freshly cooked food. Yeah, and he says that is something that hawkers today, his words, not mine, in case some of you are hawkers, or no hawkers, he said something that hawkers today don't understand is that you must serve customers only fresh food. So from him, I learned, give others your best. Yeah? Don't give others something that's second best. Give others your best. Sure to succeed. He said, because that is the secret of all the famous hawkers in Singapore. Fresh food. Natural produce, also poverty, they have to finish it and start again, yeah? Okay, no refrigeration as it were, yeah, in those days. Then, okay, another question if I may. Food was scarce during the Japanese occupation. True or false? True, right? We all think it would be true, right? Folks, I'm afraid it's false. There was plenty of food during the Japanese occupation. What was a problem was uneven distribution. For the most part, I have to qualify and say by 1943, food was running out because of severed transport links, what have you, right? But at the start of it, at least between 1942 and end of 1943, plenty of food. So much food. Chan Kui Sang, who was a teacher and writer, and some may remember him as a Straits Times columnist, yeah? Life as I See It or something like that. Okay, Chan Kui Sang said there was so much surplus wheat flour that households had wheat flour coming out of their ears. So they started making noodles, and at almost every corner of Chinatown, said Chan Kui Sang, there was a wonton mee stall. So, scarce food? No, it didn't happen. At least not at the beginning. And Sin Leong again, we all know him. He started out as a kitchen boy at Ta Tong restaurant during the war. 1942, he started out as a kitchen boy. He was 15 years old. And what was he cooking up or helping to cook up or prepare? Shark's fin, abalone, bird's nest, fish maw, and you name it, and lots of other stuff. Yeah. So was food scarce? Not quite. But even more than food not being scarce, I think one lesson I took away from the memories of Chan Kui Sang and Sin Leong is do not assume. Do not assume. Assumption, or rather wrong assumptions, is the root of many of the world's biggest problems. So, yeah, how to succeed? First, do not assume. And just a sort of a footnote, not quite about how to succeed, but just as a footnote, I mean, a way how to succeed. How to even out food distribution. At least one local tried, but of course this was a drop in the ocean, but he tried. Felix Chia escaped Sukching because the Japanese soldier like him. He was a little boy. He was a boy of about 12 then. But then they gave him the job of dividing up fresh produce, fresh meat, fresh fish, fresh veg, every day at 3 p.m. at Tanglin. Divide up for all the Japanese households, he said, from the CEO to the smallest guy in the company. So what would he do? He would bring a mangkuk tingkat, a tiffin carrier with his food to his office for lunch. And then he would empty the mangkuk tingkat. And then when at 3 p.m. he divides up all the groceries, right? He will keep some aside for his mangkuk tingkat. Then he will smuggle it home in his tiffin carrier. And once he reached home, which was in Katong, his mother would share the spoils with their neighbors, their relatives and all that, especially those who were infirm, who were ill. Yeah, so that's Felix Chia's one-man crusade against the uneven distribution of food. Yeah, just something to share with you. Okay, let's go on to another one. How do we make a difference of others? Here we have Dr. Nella Tan. Yeah, I'm afraid I couldn't find another picture I could use, so it doesn't quite illustrate my next point, but the basic fact is that it's about children drinking milk. So we just said that we just learned that food was not scarce, right? At least not at the beginning of the Japanese occupation. But food was scarce when the Japanese surrendered, because Singapore had a bombed out harbour, severed transport links, you name it lah, soaring food prices. So food was very scarce until they had to open people's canteens. I'm sure most of you are too young to remember, but you know, canteens where they serve 35-cent meals. That's also in the Oral History Centre collection. Very fascinating to read about. But well into the 70s, 60s and 70s, many children were still going hungry to school. No breakfast, no lunch, no recess, nothing. So Mrs. Katijun Nisa Siraj, we just encountered her, right? She's quite feisty. Yeah, she was equally feisty here. She said, you know what? We have to stop doing this. Yeah, I mean, we have to do something about this. My apologies. We have to do something about this. Most people would hesitate because things are always being done a certain way, right? So why go and rock the boat, right? Not for her. She said, look, I heard that UNICEF is giving powdered milk to some countries around the world. So she wrote to the Social Welfare Department and she said, can you please give me 200 pounds of milk powder a month so I can give it to the children, so at least they have milk in their stomach and not teh-o, not just teh-o in their stomach the whole day. So that's what she did. Made a difference to others. Similarly, Mrs. Keki Medora, who became a Singapore citizen in 1963, she was Parsi. She came from India, but she worked for Singaporean causes. We all know about the Singapore Children's Society. She's one of the founders. What would she do? She said, I became a professional beggar. I go to all the rich and famous and I beg for what? For $60 per needy child per year. Not month, per year. But even in those days, $60 is a huge sum, right? Why? What does she spend the $60 on? $5 a month. Open savings account for the child. Give the child pocket money. Give the child a Christmas present every year. So that's Mrs. Keki Medora. Sometimes be a professional beggar. Put aside your pride. It can really save lives. Okay, and then we have, in a different way, Ian MacLeod. It's not so much Ian MacLeod's own personal experience, but that of his mother, who was a prisoner of war. I'm afraid I've forgotten her name, so forgive me for that. But I do remember the name of her fellow detainee, her fellow POW, Phyllis, who told Ian, who never saw his mother alive after the Japanese occupation. Phyllis told Ian that his mother, my apology, his mother would sweep the drains and would sing in the sweetest voice. keep singing throughout the day, throughout the night, until everyone would just sit where they were at night and listen to her sing. And even all the Japanese guards, in the internment camp, would come to listen to her. So when she was on her deathbed at Sime Road in the camp, the Japanese commander sent her a boiled egg, which Ian MacLeod says at that time was as good as a full dinner. But she couldn't eat it. It was too late, yeah. But there we are. Sometimes using your natural gifts, sharing your natural gifts with others can move the hardest hearts. Yeah. So there we are, folks, how to make a difference to others. Eggs feature in our next question. Yeah, we know her, Elizabeth Choi, right? But before Elizabeth Choi, I'd like to share with you about the Deskers. So eggs feature hugely in How to Love, at least the experience of Joseph Anthony Desker and his wife Betty Fernandez. Now, Joseph and Betty were in Bahau, malaria-infested Bahau, the settlement that the Japanese sent all the Eurasians from Singapore to. Bahau is in Negeri Sembilan. So actually, in a way, send them to their deaths because only 2 out of 30 people survived Bahau. And 2 of them are here, Joseph and Betty Desker. But Betty lay dangerously ill in Kuala Pilah Hospital near Bahau for 2 months. And Joseph couldn't go to see her. He said, I simply had no opportunity to see her. I didn't know whether she was alive or dead. So what would Joseph do? How to show his love? Every time he could afford it, he would send eggs to a truck driver going to Kuala Pilah, send to Betty. Yeah, I'm pleased to say that Joseph and Betty survived the war. But yeah, that show your love against the odds in any way you can. That's how to love. Yeah, and then now we have Joseph and Betty got married at St. Joseph's Church in Victoria Street. Where are we? We're over that side, right? And guess what their friends did? They put all their flour, sugar, and egg rations to bake their wedding cake. So sometimes going without, yeah, that's also love. How to show your love, yeah. And now we come to the choice. Mr. Choi Kun Heng and his wife Elizabeth. Yeah. How are we doing, folks? You okay? Falling asleep? Thanks. Yeah, so we come to the choice, and as we all know, Elizabeth is a war heroine, and that's because she and her husband had helped to smuggle out a radio to the British in Changi prison, and Japanese got wind of it. And so they detained both husband and wife separately, Mr. Choi first and then Mrs. Choi, and subjected them to the most excruciating torture. At one point, Elizabeth was whipped and electrocuted in front of her husband. And the Japanese told them, as this was going on, the evil was going on, they said, okay, both of you confess, we let you go. Otherwise, we'll execute both of you. So what did husband and wife say? Wife has already said, if you have to execute me for telling the truth, I can't help it, go ahead. And Mr. Choi said, I have nothing to say. And he always had nothing to say. So no matter what they had to go through personally, together and apart, they never betrayed each other. They never betrayed their country, or at least the side to which they pledged allegiance. Yeah. So Elizabeth was freed by the Kempeitai, the Japanese military police, after 193 days. But Mr. Choi was freed only after the Japanese surrender in September 1945. Yeah, so, the marriage vow, right, for better or worse. So the Chois really lived through what it meant to be for worse. Yeah, so there we are, how to love. Here's one that remains very elusive but has become a course at Harvard, how to be happy. Very elusive, right? So up here you may recognize him in his salad days. This is Singapore's first Olympic medalist, Mr. Tan Hao Liang. Yeah, and here he is showing his Olympic silver medal to President Yusof Ishak. Absolutely, yeah. And It's quite a beautiful story. It's got nothing to do with the medal, folks, but it's quite a beautiful story. How to be happy, folks? Any ideas? Lovely. You have anticipated Subramanyam there, but thanks. We'll come back to that contentment. But sometimes it also helps us be happy if we help others fulfill their dreams. So now you must be wondering, what's this got to do with Tan Hao Liang? Okay. Goh Teck Puan was the chef de mission. Sorry, I may not be pronouncing that correctly, but chef de mission to the Singapore contingent for the 1972 Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh, Scotland. Now, over there, you remember, we may not remember Elaine Seng. Anyone remembers the swimmer Elaine Seng? Okay, so Elaine was competing at the Commonwealth Games that year, and then Junie Seng, we of course know Junie Seng, right, the golden girl, and her mother, and their mother, Mrs. Seng, were in Edinburgh to cheer Elaine on. But Mrs. Seng, quite ambitious. She also wanted Junie to be a champion, future champion swimmer. Junie at that time was only 6 years old. And she told Mr. Goh Teck Puan, the chef de mission, I want Junie to swim in the games pool. Let her have a feel of what it means to represent her country. So Mr. Goh is a lovely chap. He made it happen. But guess what? Mrs. Seng and Junie were not athletes, so they couldn't stay in the games village. So they had to, find a hotel or inn nearby. Unfortunately, Edinburgh is not Singapore. Huh? No, like you just walk out, there's an NTUC or wet market. There were no shops nearby, no restaurants. So food was a problem for the Sengs, for Mrs. Seng and her daughter, and Junie. So guess what happened? Any guesses? Food delivery, we wish, right? The one who with all his plastic bag of burgers, right? No. What happened was in 1972, Edinburgh, Tan Hao Liang and his teammates, every day, every morning after breakfast, they tapao. All the milk, bread, butter, you name it, they tapao. And then they bring it to Teck Puan's room for Junie and Mrs. Seng. So that's how Tan Hao Liang heard of, the Seng's dream or Junie's dream, and he helped to keep Junie fed while she was trying out in the games pool. Yeah. So that's how kind Tan Hao Liang was. As a bit of a footnote, right? People were not kind to Tan Hao Liang, after he won the Olympic silver medal. It's in the OHC collection too. This boxer named Harold De Castro, he's we are okay, Ben? He's Mr. Singapore 1948. He was a bodybuilder. Then he became a boxer. He was Hao Liang's good friend. He trained with Hao Liang. Although Hao Liang was not a bodybuilder, he was a weightlifter, right? Hao Liang is a weightlifter. But after the winner, the silver medal, the weightlifters all shunned Tan Hao Liang. Yeah, the weightlifting community. Yeah, and despite that, I only mention this to say, despite that, Tan Hao Liang remembered to take food for Junie Seng and her mother. So, says a lot about the man, right? Okay, so how to be happy, help others fulfill their dreams. And similarly, we know Mr. Kunalan, right? Sprinter C. Kunalan, who held the national 100-meter record for 33 years. It was UK Sham who broke it in 2001. Go read C. Kunalan's oral history, because he's very happy to tell you who helped UK Sham break his 100-meter record after 33 years. Any guesses who helped Sham? That would have made a beautiful story, right? Yeah. But another champion swimmer did it, Ang Peng Siong. Ang Peng Siong. Once the world's fastest swimmer in 1982. And Peng Siong said to, with Kunalan present, their good friends, said, I'm going to take Sham under my wing. I'm going to sponsor him. I'm going to make him a gym instructor. I'm going to give him time out to train. And that's how UK Sham broke Kunalan's record. Yeah. So lift others up if you can. Lift someone else up, because guess what? In doing so, you lift humanity up. Yeah. So beautiful, beautiful stories, folks. I these stories write themselves. They are just so good, the lived experiences of these wonderful Singaporeans. Now, contentment, you were saying, right? So really, you know the secret to happiness already, contentment. Subramaniam son of Munian may not be a familiar name as Si Kunalan or Goh Teck Puan or indeed Tan Hao Liang, Yusof Ishak. Subramaniam proofread all the documents in Tamil for the proclamation of Singapore's independence in 1965. He was locked in for 3 days. Yeah, at the Singapore National Printers. Want to go to toilet, need to be escorted by the police in case, they are scared they'll leak out the news, you see. Nobody knew that Singapore was going to be separated from Malaysia. So that was Subramaniam for you. But he had tragedy early in life. His father died when he was 3, died of tuberculosis, leaving the mother to bring up, I think, 3-4 children. So Subramaniam learned from an early age, live a simple life. Find joy in things that do not cost money. So what would this be? Swim in the sea. Play games with your friends, fighting spiders, what have you. Catch crabs for the family pot. Yeah. He figured that he was quite good at catching crabs. 15 crabs at a time. Everyone was full. So, yeah, contentment. Be content with who you are. Be content with what you have. That's how to be happy. And not much more, folks, but some happiness to consider given that National Day is nigh, right? So how with all these lived experiences and inspirations, how do we reach SG 100 and beyond? That's a big question these days, right? On many of our minds, yeah? So he may not be the most obvious candidate for this sort of advice, but we've got one of Singapore's most famous footballers, the late Dollah Kassim, the Gaelic king. Huh? I'm sure we all remember him, how he led the Kallang Roar, right? Okay, so now, everyone knows Gaelic king and all that, but did you know that when Singapore played Johor once, an angry football fan threw a curry puff at Dollah Kassim and hit him squarely in the face as he was about to take a corner kick? Yeah, Dollah said it really hurt. But you know what he did? He just picked up the curry puff, the epok-epok, he broke it into, just to show like he's not, you don't play with Singapore. And then he ate half of it, and then he threw the other half down, and I think he scored. Yeah, Singapore beat Johor in that game. Yeah, and can you imagine how loud Singapore cheered when Dollah helped the team win the Malaysia Cup in 1977? I think some of us may remember that night. Entire HDB blocks were reverberating in cheers. Yeah, and Dollah says, oh my God, that Singapore feeling, when there's a Kallang Roar, when everybody cheers, yeah. He says that Singapore spirit, yeah. That's what makes him so proud to be Singaporean, but also that's what he believes is going to take Singapore forward forever and ever. That Singapore spirit, that Kallang Roar. So how do you reach SG 100? Singapore spirit, that special kampung spirit, right? And a special kampung spirit, Jeb Chong and Raymond Leong. Anyone recognizes their names?
Jeb Chong is the Quest.
Yes, that's right. The founder of the Quest, together with Raymond. And Jeb and Raymond grew up together in the same Tiong Bahru neighborhood, running in and out of each other's houses. You know how it was in those days, right? Open door policy, right? I learned from many among you. Yeah, the Quest. So the thing was, Jeb and Raymond really brought out what kampung spirit meant. It meant when you go for a trip, you entrust your house keys to your neighbors. No problem. When you come back, everything will be intact in your house. Nothing will be missing. It means that if your water and electricity gonna cut off, you just go to your neighbor's house for a bath or for meals, Those were the days, yeah. And so Jeb and Raymond said, everybody tried everything they could to make a living, selling second-hand goods, whatever they had to sell. They go to Sungai Road, put a handkerchief, put their things there and sell. But the incredible thing, they said, the most important thing is that they are never unhappy. Everyone seemed to be so happy despite all the challenges. So do we Do we need, more money, more achievements, more success to reach SG 100 and beyond, to tackle the future? I think we do need the kampong spirit. We do need the Singapore spirit, the will to do it together. But everything else, yeah, we can discuss, we can negotiate, yeah? And last but not least, I know this is not Singaporean, but he was quite an architect of the Singapore economy, at least in the early days, the early years. Dr. Albert Winsemius, we probably have heard of him, the Dutch economist. Does anybody remember what he said on 9 August 1965? Anybody at all? It's in his oral history, but maybe it has not been published before. What he said on 9 August 1965 was, "This is the best day in the life of Singapore. The best day in Singapore's life." Any guesses why?
Singapore will not be hampered by the Malaysian...
Absolutely, yeah. Free of Malaysia, free of all the constraints, the bullying and all that, free to chart its own destiny. So folks, it always seems to me that, these days, future is so unknowable, right? So uncertain, right? Disruption, right? But actually, not very different from 1965, right? So if somebody, an economist who actually helped Portugal, some parts of Germany, even the US, he advised the US after World War II how to rebuild Poland, how to rebuild its economies. If he can say this of Singapore, the best day in the life of Singapore, on the day when we still depended on others for water, no natural resources, then sky's the limit, folks. How to reach SG 100 and beyond, it's not even a question. Yeah? It's, if we have our kampong spirit, our Singapore spirit, our Kallang Raw, we will make it. No need to worry, yeah? So at this juncture, I hope you have enjoyed some of the stories that I've shared with you this evening. But yeah, 33 names, yes. I typed them all, yes. And it's very important, okay? I think you will realize by now from the few stories that I've had the opportunity to share with you that the oral history collection of Singapore is really one giant love letter to all of us. And it would be very remiss of me not to acknowledge the people who have enabled this giant love letter to be written all these years. 40 years, folks. The Oral History Centre is 40 years this year. It started in 1979. And some of these wonderful people up here, they have been with the Oral History Centre since 1979. So we've got some in the audience, Lai Bing. Yeah. So up here we have the 18 names of all the current Oral History Centre folks, your interviewers, transcribers, translators, technicians. It takes a lot to give you the national treasure that is the Oral History Centre collection. But nevertheless, could you join me in saluting, in thanking these wonderful people, past and present, of the Oral History Centre, for the wonderful work they have done and that they continue to do. Thank you so much, Wendy, who leads them, and Lighty, and everyone else actually who, who have helped us to appreciate our history much better. So thank you for acknowledging them, and it's really my great pleasure to have learned so much about this collection. So last but not least, because I'm being reminded that time is up, we heard about all the stories. The stories that I've shared with you are contained, and many other stories are contained in this book that I've just launched recently. It's called The Sound of Memories, and it's on Kindle now. If you want the QR code to link you to the Kindle version, or you will have the book in all bookstores soon, very soon, I'm told. Better not give you an exact date, but very soon. So I hope you will enjoy leafing through this book of stories. But most importantly, I hope you will go and explore the Oral History Centre website for all and even more wonderful stories. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time and your interest, and wish you a great evening. Yeah.